Hello. Welcome to another episode of Video Game Therapy. I am VGTR and today we're going to be talking about boss battles, but not just any boss battles. Boss fights are an integral part to the flow and development of a video game. As you progress through the narrative of the game, you expect there to be certain points where the skills that you've been honing throughout the game are tested at new levels. Bosses tend to pose more of a challenge than the average foe, and they also often switch up gameplay or expect you to use items or skills that you've recently added to your inventory. They really are a key part of gameplay, and when done right, they serve as some of the most memorable moments in gaming. In all games that include bosses though, there is one certain type of boss that holds an integral and important job within the game that it's featured in. And that is, of course, the final boss.
Fuck's sake. Do you even read
What?
the script? Do you even read the script? First boss.
Who gives a fuck about the first boss? Yes, final bosses are obviously important. They're intended to be the peak of your video game journey. They symbolise whatever evil or darkness it is that you've just spent the last 30 hours trying to eradicate. Defeating the final boss means defeating the game. They are the ultimate reward. But what happens after the final boss? Nothing. The first boss, however, is a criminally overlooked key component to a fantastic video game. Why? Well, the first boss has three specific jobs. The first job is to set gameplay expectations for the rest of the game. A good first boss should say, "Oh, I see. Got a feel for the game, have you now?"
Prove it, dickhead.
They should pose a challenge that forces the player to utilise the core mechanics that they've learned over the tutorial and early gameplay, but with a step up in difficulty that reflects the true nature of things to come. Not too hard that it turns players away, but not too soft that it sends players to sleep. The second job is to sink the game's teeth into the player. And no, I'm not saying that all first bosses should have big teeth. I'm saying that, like any other media that we ingest, there's often a Goldilocks zone, a point at which the consumer will decide whether to stick with it or to ditch it and move on to something else. Now, providing the tutorial isn't a red hot piece of garbage, gamers are usually reasonable enough to understand that the tutorial really isn't there to be enjoyed and it's just there to teach you the core mechanics. Nobody's fucking jumping for joy at the idea of doing a game tutorial. Upon completing a tutorial, there may be a few levels or some basic gameplay to allow the player to practice what they've learned in the tutorial. And as long as that part isn't also red hot garbage, then players are likely to stick through that as well. Meaning the first boss is generally that important point where the player will decide whether the game's worth investing 40 hours of their life into, or whether it's giving them as much excitement as reading a Mothercare magazine. If a first boss plays well, looks great, sounds great, it's almost a no-brainer that the player is going to want to stick around and see what's next. Third and finally, the first boss should set the tone for the game thematically. Now, this is similar to the first point I made about that the first boss should set player expectations for gameplay, but this time I'm not talking about gameplay. For example, if you're playing an intense horror game, the first boss should deliver that in spades. If you're playing a platform game, you should expect to do some serious jumping and dodging. If you're playing a shooter, you should expect to do a lot of shooting and evading enemy fire. What I'm saying is that the first boss should always demonstrate the main theme of the game, because this is what you'll be doing for most of the time that you're playing. There's plenty of opportunities later on in the game for more experimental bosses that pull you away from the standard gameplay and try something new, and there's some excellent bosses that do this, but that's a different video for a different time. But for now, I bring you my top 6 opening boss battles. Number 6, Jack, Resident Evil 7. Remember when I said that if a game is an intense horror, then the first boss should deliver it in spades? Well, here it is. Literally.
Hey, put that door back! Put that door back! Wait!
You are locked in a garage with Maniac Jack, who's trying to eat you, or fuck you, or maim you. Honestly, I don't really know, to be honest. But one thing I am certain of is that it is fucking petrifying. The fact that the fight takes place in a garage is what really helps to deliver the pure dread. I mean, it's a garage. They're small. This means that at no point you're as far away from Jack as you'd like to be, and the threat is consistently present. This, coupled with the intentional slow movement of the game's protagonist, you know that there's nowhere to run and hide, because even if there was, Ethan Winters walks at the pace of, well, an average human, I guess. But this is something we rarely see in video games, so it feels extremely slow, especially when you're stuck in a garage with crazy fucking Jack. Like with any good horror game though, the fight fills you with an existential dread, and whilst it's taking place, it's like a nightmare that you just want to wake up from. But when it's finally over, you're rewarded with a brief moment of calm tranquility, a feeling that you didn't even know was addictive. The idea of being face to face with blood-curdling terror, and then the moment you realise that you're safe. It is addictive. It is a drug. Quickly followed by a euphoric sense of, if I can survive that, I can survive anything. There are few first bosses that sold the game to me as well as this one did. Switch gears here. Number 5 is Big Topbop from Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. So by this point in the game, you've done a few levels, you should be fairly familiar with the platforming aspects of the game. You should be kind of familiar with the abilities Diddy, Dixie and Cranky offer you. But before you move on to World 2, it's time to step it up a notch. In fact, if it's your first playthrough, I would probably say 2 or 3 notches. Big Topbop may not look like much of a boss, but like all the bosses on this game, seriously, every single boss on this game is amazing. He puts up a pretty tough challenge. So DK and whoever you've chosen as your sidekick will be thrust into a weird circus halfpipe where you'll have to battle Big Top the sea lion. Dodging Big Bop's nosedive is no easy feat. It'll take precision jumping unlike anything you've experienced up to that point. Once you do land a hit on him, you'll then have to evade various enemies he throws your way, some of which can be killed and some of which can't. Like most Nintendo bosses though, once you land 3 hits on the boss, it's all over.
Wrong.
Each boss on Tropical Freeze has 3 stages, each one more of a challenge than the one before. And if you die, you don't restart at the stage you were at, you start right at the beginning of the boss. And who said Tropical Freeze was a fucking kids game? Because it's not. And to top off this amazing first boss battle, the music is fucking sublime. Number 4, Poseidon, God of War 3.
Challenge me, mortal? A god of Olympus?
I mean, what do you even say about that? You're fighting Poseidon, god of the sea, in a tight enclosed arena which happens to be on the back of Gaia, the personification of Earth itself. I mean, this shit is literally biblical. The god of war fighting the god of the sea on the shoulders of Earth. God of War has always been a series that prides itself on precise yet over-the-top combat, and this boss battle is where you will first learn its importance in the game. Until now, you've only had to hack and slash down a few hordes of enemy scrubs, which is no real feat for a man of Kratos' stature. But this is a whole new level of precision. Button mashing is not welcome in this boss fight. The game says, hey, I know this looks like an arcadey blade wielding arcade mash fest, but actually there's much more to it. And if you want to continue this clearly fantastic fucking journey, you better hone your skills. Boy. It's the wrong one, it's the wrong one. This boss battle is one part of what has to go down as one of the most mental prologues I've ever played in a game. You will literally scale to the summit of Mount Olympus in some of the most crazy cinematics I've ever seen, only to be sent plummeting all the way down to hell, which ironically is where you get your first respite. Hell is the calm place. Number 3, Tom Morello, Guitar Hero 3. Guitar Hero 3 was the quintessential rhythm game of its time, at least for Western audiences, and if you've completed the Your First Real Gig section of the game, you'll encounter your first boss battle. This time though, unlike the songs you've already played, you will literally be battling it out against a boss. this isn't you versus the song. This is you versus the boss versus the song. It was a brilliant addition to the Guitar Hero games that introduced a new element to gameplay. No longer were you just trying to hit the right notes to the song, you had to actually beat the score of the guitarist you were battling. But how could I ever get a better score than Tom Morello playing his own fucking song? Well, that's the genius nature of this boss. You can't. Tom will always play it perfectly. The way to beat him is to force him into making mistakes. The player does this by making sure they hit the correct notes, which will award the player with power-ups that can be used against Tom Morello to knock him off his game. The power-ups allow you to be able to add double notes to Tom's screen or snap his strings or overload his amp. The song itself is a range of really crazy guitar solos that you do back and forth, and despite this not being an overly difficult challenge to overcome, it's one that sets the tone. You get it? Brilliantly for what's to come, and will leave you eagerly anticipating who you're going to battle next and what they have to offer. Number 2, Ludex Gunda, Dark Souls 3. Is that how you say it? I've got no idea if that's how you say it. Okay, I know that I said the first boss should be not too hard, not too soft, but I also said that the first boss should be a step up in difficulty that reflects the true nature of things to come. Step forward, Ludex Gunda. This is done perfectly in Dark Souls 3. Anyone that's played Souls games before knows what's coming. They know the game's going to put them through unrivaled, unrelenting torment, and that's why these games are so frequently mentioned in conversations about video game difficulty. They are outrageously tough games, and for a first boss, this fits the mold perfectly. Before you face Ludex, you will literally have only done the tutorial, which says, here's the buttons, and here's a few enemies to try them out on. Following that, you're almost immediately thrust into this battle. This guy should be called Ludex the Civ, because that's exactly what this boss does. It sieves out people who are not gonna like this game. If you can't beat Ludex, or if you don't enjoy the challenge he offers, then simply put, you ain't gonna enjoy this fucking game. Turn it off, because you're gonna fucking hate it. In a sense, Ludex Gunda is the real tutorial system for the game, because whilst you may now know the controls and have slain a few scrubs on your way to Ludex, that really isn't what this game's about. Ludex will immediately teach you the true nature of this game, precise and considered combat that will simply not allow you to rely on button mashing, guesswork or good luck. The only way to take this guy down is to learn his patterns, evade his movements and concentrate at all times. Whilst he's but a tiny speck compared to some of the other bosses in the game, this boss does all of the above perfectly, and no player passing through that smoke door after beating Ludex can honestly say that they didn't know what they were in for. Okay, number 1. What the fuck else was it gonna be? The Stranger, God of War.
My turn.
Otherwise known as Baldur, son of Odin, you will have played the game for probably an hour or more at this point. Technically speaking, you will already have faced a boss-like battle in this game when you fight the troll. However, I'm not including that as a boss because I'm not including any enemies that become regular enemies later in the game, and you will fight many of those trolls throughout the adventure. Baldur, however, is the first boss on the game, and Jesus fucking Christ, if you fought that boss and then thought, nah, this game isn't for me, then you need to get your head checked, because this does everything perfectly. Credit to the combat mechanics themselves in this game. They are so precise and so smooth that combat in general just feels so dreamy and rewarding. When you go toe to toe with Baldur though, he will force you to use all you have learned, especially on the harder difficulties. You'll have to be precise with your parry, formidable with your axe, selective with your fists, and exact with your dodges. You'll be rewarded with the best looking interlaced combat cinematics I've ever seen. You'll go through 3 different stages and be forced to learn his combat approaches and movements. You'll develop a new and more solid understanding of the on-screen cues, which will in turn teach you about when's best to attack and when's best to defend. But most importantly though, the game is called God of War. This battle will truly put you in the driving seat of a God of War. And once complete, that is exactly how you will feel. Find me a better opening boss battle than this. I fucking dare you. And that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for the continued support. If you liked the video, please pop a like on it. Helps out the video a lot. And if you're new here, please subscribe. Next goal is 300 subs, and I'm hoping to work towards that before Christmas, hopefully.